Veronica Ellis, at 51, had spent a lifetime putting everyone else first, her family, her work, her relationships. After a painful divorce, she slipped into isolation, struggling with a loneliness she didn't dare name. Then she met Darren online, and for a moment, he felt like the answer she had been praying for. He promised excitement, a break from the monotony that had swallowed her life. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of something real. But Darren was not the man he pretended to be. What began as a night of adventure swiftly twisted into a nightmare. 11 men, cold and unfeeling, took their turns violating her. Veronica's cries were swallowed by the ocean breeze as her body was tossed aside like trash. They assumed she was just another forgotten woman, silenced forever. Would she survive? And what would become of Darren? Welcome to Ruthless Realities. Thank you to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily crime updates. And don't forget to subscribe. Veronica Ellis, a 51-year-old woman from a quiet suburban town in Georgia, stood at a turning point in her life, where the years behind her had blurred into routine, sacrifice, and quiet resignation. She had spent most of her adulthood doing what was expected, the role of wife, the role of mother, all while slowly letting her own needs fade into the background. As a nurse, she poured her energy into caring for others, often forgetting to care for herself. Her marriage had offered stability, but her husband's infidelities and emotional absence wore her down piece by piece. When the divorce finally came, it didn't feel freeing. It felt like a harsh reminder that she had spent years living for everyone but herself. Her daughter, Maya, 25 and newly engaged to a police officer, should have been a source of joy, but the news only deepened the tension between them. Veronica believed she had given Maya everything she could, yet the emotional distance between them had only widened with time. Maya resented her mother's passivity, her lifelong habit of existing rather than living. Now, with her daughter's future unfolding before her, Veronica faced the unsettling truth that her own life felt painfully empty. At 51, she was stepping into a new chapter, one both thrilling and terrifying. For the first time in years, she wanted more. She didn't want to fade into the background of her daughter's world or become a relic of her past. She wanted to feel alive. The world suddenly seemed vast again, filled with possibilities she had long denied herself. Tired of being the woman who said no to adventure, she finally looked outward. And that's when she received a message from a man she had met on an app a friend had recommended not long ago. Darren Hughes was 38, confident, charming, and attentive in a way Veronica hadn't experienced in years. His profile picture showed a confident smile, warm eyes, and a hint of mystery. In their conversations, Darren was everything she had longed for, thoughtful, engaging, and full of promises of a different, more vibrant life. He told her he worked in business, loved to travel, and enjoyed connecting with people who sought new experiences. He made her feel seen, as though he understood a world she once dreamed of, a world full of excitement and discovery. So when he invited her to a yacht party, Veronica hesitated only briefly. It's going to be unforgettable, he had said, his enthusiasm contagious. A night away from her responsibilities. A chance to shake off the weight of a decades-long marriage. An opportunity to step into a world far beyond the limits of her small life. For too long, she had lived in the shadows. This felt like the beginning of something new, despite the unease twisting in her stomach. After all, she barely knew him. Veronica agreed. She wasn't sure why she trusted Darren, or why she believed this night could unlock something she had buried deep inside herself. But his words, his promises, made her feel as though she could finally breathe again. She packed light, expecting a carefree night, a small escape. For once, she wanted something for herself. But life rarely reveals the consequences of our choices until it's too late. Hope often speaks louder than caution, and so Veronica stepped onto that yacht, her heart thudding with a blend of fear and excitement. The city lights shimmered across the water as Darren greeted her with a warm embrace and a promise of a night she wouldn't forget. She had no idea the adventure she sought would soon twist into a nightmare from which she could not run. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. Veronica stepped onto the yacht, her pulse quickening with excitement and uncertainty. The Miami marina glowed beneath the setting sun, casting amber light over the sleek vessel. The yacht sparkled like a silver beacon, its polished exterior catching the last streaks of daylight. The air hummed with anticipation, and Veronica felt more alive than she had in years. Darren met her at the entrance with a reassuring smile, his confident presence easing her nerves. When his hand brushed hers, the connection she felt online suddenly felt real. He had promised her a night to remember. Young, energetic guests filled the deck, their laughter floating over the music. Veronica fell out of place for a moment, the only older woman in the crowd, but Darren stayed close, making her feel as though she belonged. His charisma drew attention everywhere he went. The yacht was alive with music, clinking glasses and carefree laughter. Champagne flowed freely, and Veronica took a hesitant sip, letting the warmth settle in her stomach. The men around her were attractive and vibrant, their energy intoxicating. For the first time in forever, she didn't feel like the tired mother or neglected ex-wife. She felt like Veronica, a woman rediscovering herself. Darren led her onto the dance floor. The music thumped through her chest, inviting her to release the heaviness she had carried for years. She wasn't much of a dancer, but the rhythm of the night carried her. She moved with Darren, letting herself be swept into the moment. But as the night deepened, the energy subtly shifted. The laughter grew louder, more uneven. The music, once freeing, now felt unsettling. Darren's attention began to wane. Veronica noticed he no longer focused on her the way he had earlier. He drifted into crowd, slowly fading from her side as other men began hovering around her. What had once felt like a dream was now slipping into something she could no longer hold on to. Then Darren returned, but something was different. His smile, once warm and inviting, now held a sharpness she hadn't seen before. His hand lingered too long on her arm, and though his voice was still smooth, it carried a tone that didn't match the earlier gentleness. He led her away from the dance floor, guiding her down a narrow passage inside the yacht, away from the laughter, away from the bright lights, away from the carefree crowd. Veronica's heartbeat quickened, the excitement she felt earlier dissolving into a rising unease. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice unsteady. But Darren only smiled, that same unsettling curve of his lips she'd noticed before. "Trust me," he murmured, voice low and coaxing. "It's going to be fun." Fun. That had been the promise, hadn't it? But now the word fell hollow, stripped of its meaning, a thin shell that made her stomach twist. Veronica tried to swallow her growing dread as Darren led her deeper into the yacht, pulling her farther and farther from the sounds of party. The deeper they walked, the darker the hallway became. She glanced over her shoulder, hoping someone might notice. But there was no one, only the long corridor and the echo of her own nervous footsteps. They turned a corner, and suddenly she was surrounded. Men she didn't recognize stood waiting, faces she had barely glimpsed earlier now staring at her with expressions she couldn't decipher. The friendly, lively atmosphere from before had vanished completely. Veronica's breath hitched. Her pulse hammered violently as she understood just how isolated she'd become. "Darren, what's going on?" she whispered. But her voice barely existed over the sound of the men's low, cruel laughter. The warmth that had once radiated from Darren was gone, replaced by something colder, something predatory. His smile was no longer comforting. It looked like a mask. He wasn't the man who had promised her a magical night. He was someone else entirely. And Veronica was beginning to understand that her attempt to escape her old life had led her into a trap. The men stepped closer. Her thoughts raced, but her body refused to move, as if she had slipped into a nightmare she couldn't wake from. She had been naive to believe she could chase excitement without consequence. She had trusted the wrong person. And now, as the men closed in, she realized that trust had a devastating price. Thank you for your incredible support. This channel thrives because of viewers like you. Join our YouTube membership to unlock exclusive perks, premium content, and help us continue bringing you the stories you love. The circle of men tightened, their eyes dark with intent. The fake pleasantries they'd worn earlier stripped away. The room seemed to shrink around her with every step they took. Veronica tried to speak, to protest, but the words tangled in her throat. Darren shoved her deeper into the dimly lit corner. "This is going to be fun," he said. His tone was cold, mechanical, a chilling contrast to the charisma he displayed earlier. His eyes held no warmth now, only calculation, as though she were nothing more than a piece in a game he'd already won. "Please no," Veronica whispered, but the men didn't care. They weren't listening. They had no intention of stopping, no intention of letting her go. One by one, they closed in. Her body froze as each man took his turn, tearing at her sense of self with every violation. Veronica fought, arms flailing, voice cracking with desperation. But they were too strong. Their laughter drowned out her screams. Her phone was snatched, smashed, discarded, cutting her off completely. The ocean waves pounding against the yacht's hull swallowed her pleas. Her cries disappeared into the vastness of the water. To them, she was just another forgotten woman. It was methodical, the way they moved. A sick, well-practiced machine. Darren and his friends had perfected the process. Isolate, overwhelm, silence. Veronica was not their first victim, and she wouldn't be their last. For 7 years, they had hunted women exactly like her, older, emotionally vulnerable, isolated. The ones least likely to speak out. They lured them with charm and promises of excitement, turning their hopes into torment. They had always gotten away with it. But Veronica, even broken and bloodied, was different. She would not allow this to disappear into silence. As the men finished, leaving her trembling and bruised on the cold floor, they walked away laughing, unaware that what they had done would not remain hidden forever. They didn't look back. They never did. Veronica's body ached. Her mind felt fractured. But deep inside, a spark had ignited, a fire that refused to die. What do you think should happen to men like this? Should they ever walk free after crimes like these? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's talk about how to stand against injustice. When the assault finally ended, the men cast her aside as if she were nothing more than an object they no longer needed. Veronica lay there broken, on the cold floor of the yacht. The room spun, her vision blurred, her limbs heavy and unresponsive. Numbness washed over her. They didn't even spare her a final glance. The yacht, a place she once thought might bring her freedom, had become her prison. Her sobs, once full of terror, were swallowed by the crashing waves outside. She lay in that dark corner, abandoned, as the night dragged on and the vast, uncaring ocean rocked the vessel in its cold embrace. As Veronica lay there, her body battered and her clothes torn, she could feel the world slipping away from her. Her mind, though foggy with pain, could still grasp the reality of what had just happened. They had done this to her. They had stolen everything from her in a matter of hours, leaving her shattered and broken. Nothing more than a discarded piece of trash. As the yacht continued its slow drift through the night, the waves rocked it gently, carrying her unconscious body farther into the deep darkness. And in that vast, endless expanse, Veronica was forgotten. No one would know where she was. No one would come. She was alone. She was left for dead, an afterthought in a cruel game. But the ocean, with all its vastness, couldn't hide her from fate. It wasn't the ocean that swallowed her up, though. It wasn't the wave that would claim her. Fate had something else in store for Veronica, something that would make sure she didn't disappear into the depths of oblivion as the men thought she would. Her body, broken and bruised, was not ready to give up just yet. Veronica woke up in a hospital room 3 days later, her body wrapped in white bandages, her face swollen, her limbs stiff and uncooperative. The hospital was sterile, quiet, too quiet. The beep of machines was the only sound, the cold light of the fluorescent lamp shining down on her as she slowly blinked her eyes open. The world came back to her in fragments, pain, confusion, fear. But there was something else too, something stronger, something that refused to let her give up. At first, she didn't know where she was. Her mind struggled to grasp the reality around her. She tried to move, to sit up, but her body screamed in protest. The pain was overwhelming. Every inch of her felt raw, bruised, as though it had been torn apart. But through the pain, she felt it, an overwhelming sense of relief. She was alive. She had survived. A sailor had called 911 when he saw her. The doctors who worked on her were astounded. They didn't think she would make it to the first few hours, let alone 3 months of surgeries, therapies, and rehabilitation. Veronica had been shattered, broken bones, internal injuries, and the worst kind of emotional and psychological trauma. But with each passing day, she showed them how strong she was. Her body slowly healed, though it would never be the same. Her spirit, however, was unbroken. It refused to be extinguished. Every morning when Veronica woke up, she felt that strength inside her. It wasn't the physical strength that mattered. It was a will to survive, the will to live, the will to fight back against what had been done to her. The doctors could patch her up, but they could not repair what had been broken inside her. That was something only she could do. Veronica's daughter, Maya, visited her every day. She was devastated, of course, but there was a quiet fierceness in her eyes that had not been there before. She didn't speak much about what had happened, but there was no need. Veronica knew, and Maya knew, that her mother would never be the same. But she also knew this wasn't the end. She couldn't let it be. Veronica couldn't let it be. Her body was broken, but her will to live remained intact. She survived, defying the odds, proving that even in the face of unimaginable cruelty, the human spirit could not be extinguished. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Veronica underwent surgeries to repair the physical damage, but the mental scars remained. Every night, she woke in a cold sweat, reliving the horror of that night. But with each passing day, the nightmares became less frequent. The memories were still there, buried deep within her. But Veronica was learning to live with them. She was learning to fight. There were moments when she questioned why she had survived. Why her? Why had she been chosen for this nightmare? But then, as her body slowly healed, so did her mind. She realized she was still here for a reason, because she had a fight left in her. She wasn't going to let what they had done be the final chapter of her life. Veronica knew that what had happened wasn't something she could erase. It wasn't something she could forget, but it also wasn't going to define her. She had survived the worst thing that could ever happen to her. She had been left for dead, but she was still here, and that meant something. That meant she could still fight. The doctors, her daughter, the police, everyone involved in her recovery saw a strength in Veronica they had never expected. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to live again, to rebuild a life she had once given up. And though the journey was far from over, Veronica knew this much. She would never again be the woman who was scared to step into the unknown. She would never again be a victim. She was a survivor. What would it take for you to survive such unimaginable horror? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's discuss the strength it takes to fight back. The hospital had been a refuge for Veronica, a place where her body could begin to heal. But emotionally, she was still lost in a maze of pain, confusion, and anger. The men who assaulted her thought they could hide their actions, vanish into shadows, and leave her story untold. But they underestimated one thing: the will of a daughter who refused to let her mother's suffering remain silent. Maya, Veronica's 25-year-old daughter, was devastated by the horror her mother endured. But her grief quickly transformed into something much more dangerous: determination. She wouldn't accept the idea that her mother's torment would be buried beneath the weight of shame. When she first heard what happened, Maya's heart shattered, but her mind snapped into action. Veronica's assault was horrific, yes, but it wasn't going to be swept under the rug. Not if Maya had anything to say about it. Maya had always been close to her mother, despite the emotional distance that had developed over the years. Veronica's passive nature had often driven a wedge between them. But now it was a bond, an unspoken promise that Maya would fight for her mother's justice no matter the cost. And she wasn't alone. Maya's fiancé, Detective Mateo Grant, had been part of the picture for a few years now. Soft-spoken but determined, Mateo had risen to the Miami Police Department with a reputation for sharp instincts and the ability to see things others missed. He wasn't like the officers who went with the flow of cases. Mateo saw hidden patterns, the cracks in stories that others overlooked. From the moment he heard about Veronica's case, he knew there was more to it than a random act of violence. Mateo's instincts told him something was wrong. Veronica, an older woman, alone on a yacht with strangers. On the surface, it looked like another tragic, isolated incident. But Mateo had been a detective long enough to know coincidences were rare in crimes like these. He started digging into the case, picking apart the details others overlooked. What he found sent a chill down his spine. Veronica wasn't just another victim of a random assault. She was the target of a calculated, systematic attack. He didn't speak much about it at first. Instead, he focused on the facts, the patterns beginning to emerge. He dug into Darren Hughes' background and tracked his connections. As he peeled back the layers, Mateo realized something horrifying. Darren wasn't acting alone. He was part of a group of men who had been operating under the radar for years, targeting vulnerable women like Veronica. Mateo's investigation began to unravel a network of predators that had gone unnoticed for far too long. Using his connections in the police force, he traced Darren's associates. Slowly, the picture came together. A network of men who had been hunting women like Veronica for years. Older women, emotionally vulnerable, isolated, and most importantly, women they believed would be too ashamed or frightened to report the assault. The more Mateo dug, the clearer the pattern became. There had been other women, many others, older, alone. Their attacks mirrored Veronica's, manipulated, isolated, and then assaulted by a group of men who had no fear of being caught. Each time, the evidence was destroyed, the victims too terrified to speak, and crimes buried under a veil of silence. Mateo and Maya worked tirelessly, piecing together fragments of information and testimonies from the few women brave enough to come forward. Every time they felt a breakthrough approaching, they ran into another dead end. The group they were tracking had covered their tracks, so while it seemed justice would forever slip through their fingers. But, little by little, the wall of secrecy began to crumble. Veronica's assault wasn't an isolated attack. It was merely the beginning of a much larger pattern. With every string pulled, the web of hidden predators started to unravel. The horrifying truth became undeniable. This wasn't a single crime. It was a series of assaults, each meticulously planned and executed. And for years, these men had slipped away untouched. The women before Veronica had vanished from public view, some too scared to speak, others too ashamed, and many silenced by people they trusted. Friends, acquaintances, even family members who urged them to forget and move on. But Veronica wasn't gone. She had survived. And now, with Mateo's help, the truth was clawing its way to the surface. As Mateo dug deeper, he discovered Darren and his circle were far more organized than anyone imagined. Their attacks weren't impulsive, they were strategic. They had a system for targeting their victims and a method for erasing every trace afterward. But that system was collapsing. The police were finally starting to see the larger picture, and Mateo was determined to make sure these men never escaped again. Veronica's case ignited an investigation that stretched far wider than anyone expected. What once seemed like an isolated incident was now exposed as part of an insidious network. Men working in the shadows, hunting emotionally vulnerable older women who they believed would remain silent. They had operated in plain sight, shielded by arrogance. But now, eyes were on them. Their reign of terror was ending. What do you think should happen to people who prey on vulnerable individuals like this? Should justice be swift and severe, or is there a deeper system that needs to be confronted? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about what justice truly means. After weeks of relentless effort, the day finally arrived. The pieces Mateo and Maya had fought to assemble clicked perfectly into place. Veronica's testimony, raw and heartbreaking, became the final thread that tied the men to their crimes. The forensic evidence, the photographs, the DNA, and surveillance footage cemented their case. Mateo had anticipated this moment, yet the weight of it still pressed heavily on him. These weren't random criminals. They were men who had manipulated the system for years, hiding behind wealth, charm, and fear. But the walls were closing in, and for the first time, they would face the consequences of their cruelty. The location of their hideout was a secluded home on the outskirts of Miami. It had been their base, a refuge where they believed they were invincible. But that illusion shattered the moment the police stormed the property. Veronica, still recovering but resolute, insisted on being present for the operation. Her testimony would be crucial, and she refused to let fear silence her again. The men thought they were untouchable, protected by privilege. But when the doors were kicked open, their arrogance evaporated. Panic washed over them as officers poured inside. Some tried to run. Others resisted violently, clinging to the belief they could still escape justice. Shouts, footsteps, and chaos filled the halls as officers brought them down one by one. Several were captured. Others were shot after resisting arrest. But for the first time, their arrogance met accountability. They were no longer in control. Their reign of terror was finished. Mateo stood with the officers as the last man was cuffed. His heart pounded, knowing this moment marked the end of Veronica's nightmare. They had believed they were untouchable, but accountability had finally arrived. The very silence they once relied on became the weapon that destroyed them. The men were hauled away, their world of secrecy collapsing in minutes. Officers meticulously collected evidence, securing every detail needed for conviction. For Veronica, this wasn't the end. It was a beginning of healing. The trial was long, draining, and emotional. Though physically mending, Veronica still carried deep emotional wounds. Facing her attackers in court tore open pain, but she no longer felt powerless. She felt steady, strong. Maya sat beside her through every hearing, holding her hand tightly. The courtroom was charged with tension. Every word spoken, every piece of evidence displayed, weighed heavily in the air. The men who had once smirked with arrogance now sat quiet and broken, their families stunned. Veronica wasn't just seeking punishment. She was reclaiming the voice she had buried for years. When she took the stand, she didn't tremble. She didn't shrink. She spoke her truth with unwavering clarity, telling the world how they hurt her, how she survived, and how she fought back even when her soul felt shattered. With each word, another piece of her spirit mended. Maya watched with awe. She had seen her mother's pain, but now she saw her power, a woman rising from devastation with dignity and fire. As the trial progressed, the evidence grew overwhelming. Witness testimonies, DNA, surveillance, the men's own inconsistencies. One by one, they were convicted. Their lives crumbled under the weight of their own crimes. For the first time in years, Veronica felt true justice, not the kind that erases pain, but the kind that acknowledges it. When the final verdicts were read, silence swept the courtroom. The men were sentenced, their futures sealed. For Veronica, relief didn't come, but peace did, a quiet, fragile peace. It wouldn't undo her trauma, but it marked a new beginning. What would you do if you were in Veronica's place? Would you speak out? Would you fight? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about what real justice looks like. As the courtroom emptied, Veronica remained seated, hands folded in her lap. Darren and his associates were led away in handcuffs, fear replacing their once confident smirks. They were no longer untouchable. For her, it was vindication. Justice had finally found its way to her. Yet beneath the victory, she felt a lingering uncertainty. A sense of emptiness lingered. The trial had been grueling. But now that it was over, Veronica found herself confronted with questions that refused to let her rest. The closure she had expected felt distant, almost unreachable. As she walked out of the courtroom with Maya, the weight of her thoughts grew heavier with every step. How many women had lived through what she endured? How many victims never had the chance to speak? Veronica had been fortunate. She had survived, and in surviving, she had given a voice to others who had been silenced. But as she stood on the courthouse steps, staring out over the city, she couldn't shake the haunting realization of how many other women's voices had been drowned out by the same darkness that nearly consumed her. How many never spoke? How many cries were carried away by the tide of shame and fear, never heard at all? Veronica's case was only the beginning, but it left behind a trail of unanswered questions that would never fully fade. Darren and his associates were just fragments of a much larger, festering problem. As the trial and evidence wrapped up, the truth hit Veronica like a cold gust of wind. These men had been operating for years, preying on vulnerable women, those who were older, isolated, or emotionally worn down. They had built an entire system of manipulation, using silence and fear as armor. Now, their secrets were finally out. But what about the other victims? The ones too terrified to come forward? What had become of them? How many had suffered alone, trying to rebuild shattered lives without even the hope of justice? Veronica didn't know. No one did. But she understood one thing clearly. This was only the beginning. She had fought for herself, yes, but the deeper wounds, the emotional and psychological scars, would remain, and some women had not been as lucky. In the days that followed, Veronica spent countless nights lying awake in the stillness of her room, her thoughts consumed by faces she would never know. Each one belonged to a woman with a story, a woman who had suffered in ways only she could understand. Many of them would never receive the justice Veronica had fought so hard for. The weight of that truth was nearly unbearable. Maya, always supportive, did what she could to comfort her mother, but even she couldn't completely soften the heaviness of those questions pressing down on Veronica's heart. Veronica tried to explain the swirling emotions inside her, the responsibility she felt, the need to uncover the truth for those who never spoke. But she soon realized it wasn't just about finding answers. It was about ensuring those forgotten stories were heard, even if she had to carry the burden of the unanswered for the rest of her life. As Veronica and Maya stood in the quiet aftermath of the trial, a mix of relief and sadness washed over them. Veronica's world had shifted. She had reclaimed her voice and justice had been served, but the path ahead remained uncertain. The unanswered questions would always linger, woven tightly into the fabric of her healing. Her case was the start of something greater, but it illuminated how many voices still lived in the shadows. For every woman who spoke out, how many were still trapped in silence? For every survivor who found justice, how many never got the chance? What do you think should be the next step in seeking justice for victims who can't speak up? How do we ensure every voice is heard and none forgotten? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue this conversation about the fight for justice. The incidents had taken a heavy toll on Veronica's life. Yet for the first time, she could breathe without the suffocating grip of fear. But it wasn't only the sentencing or the justice served that made her feel this way. It was a journey she had walked, the scars she carried, and the woman she had emerged as. One quiet evening, Veronica sat on the couch inside the small apartment she now shared with Maya. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through the air, mingling with the soft hum of the city outside. Life continued beyond her window, moving forward despite everything she had endured. The familiarity of it felt comforting and strange all at once. The woman who had once lived in silence, who felt powerless, now found herself grounded by a renewed clarity. As she gazed out the window, her reflection merging with the city skyline, her mind drifted back to that night, the yacht, the terror, the months of recovery. But this time, the memories didn't consume her. They no longer held power over her. She had survived hell and returned. What had been broken might never be fully restored, but it could be healed. And in that healing, she discovered a voice she never knew she had, a voice that could not be silenced again. Maya entered the room with 2 mugs of coffee and set one down beside her mother before sitting next to her. An unspoken understanding passed between them, an unbreakable bond forged through pain and love. Veronica sipped her coffee slowly, comforted by its warmth as Maya watched her with gentle concern. "I never thought we'd reach this point," Maya said softly. "After everything that happened, I never imagined we'd be here, with all of that behind us." Veronica offered a faint smile, though sadness flickered in her eyes. "Neither did I, but here we are." Maya looked toward the window, where the setting sun cast golden hues across the room. "You're different now, Mom. Stronger." Veronica nodded. "I had to be, not just for you, but for myself. I couldn't live the rest of my life in silence. I couldn't let what happened define me." Her voice cracked slightly. "I've learned the world doesn't promise us safety or fairness. Sometimes you have to fight for it. You have to fight to be heard, even when no one wants to listen." Maya reached out and held her mother's hand. Their bond, once strained by years of quiet suffering, now felt deeper than ever. "You've always been strong," Maya whispered. "You just didn't realize it." Veronica squeezed her hand, a single tear sliding down her cheek, one of relief, not sorrow. She finally understood that her pain hadn't weakened her. It had forged her. She had endured the unimaginable and was still standing, not just for herself, but for the countless women who remained silent, for those who never got the chance to speak, for those who were still suffering in the shadows. She had lived through hell and returned. What had been broken could be healed. And through that healing, she found her voice, a voice that would never again be silenced. As time passed, Veronica continued her journey of healing. She no longer walked it alone. She had her daughter, her renewed strength, and a purpose that pushed her forward. She knew the fight wasn't over. There would always be more women to fight for, more stories to uplift, more injustices to challenge. But she wasn't afraid anymore. What would you do in the face of injustice? Would you stay silent? Or would you, like Veronica, find the courage to speak? Veronica's story, though filled with unbearable pain, had become a testament to courage, a reminder that even when the world tries to silence you, your voice still matters. If you're drawn to stories like this, where love, betrayal, and obsession collide, be sure to subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. This is Ruthless Realities. Until next time,